folklore, traditions, and rituals. Billy is a native of Limerick, lives in the heart of Corca Dhuibhne on the Dingle Peninsula in Western Ireland. He holds a PhD in Irish folklore and a BA in archaeology. As well as being a university lecturer, he is a HAI wedding and funeral celebrant, and a renowned musician and artist. I mean, he's been playing traditional music since 1996, starting with the bodhrán, and has progressed to the bouzouki and many other instruments, and has played with people like Mick Broderick and Tony Daveron, um, and gained great experience playing wild dance music off the West Kerry, and um, lots more other fabulous musicians, which we will touch on. We don't want to give everything away in our introduction. Billy, conna satá agus go many dia díobh.
Gur míle maith agad tá sé aníasa bheithansa agus chum had a bheith buíoch do gach daoine ath freistal le nocht. Thanks very much everybody for coming along. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Billy, bring us back to 1996 and music. I think that'd be a nice beginning here because there's a lot of crossovers with your music accomplishments and you as a person. So bring us back to yourself playing music in 1996 and what type of pathway and journey you were on then, to bring us up to a little bit to where you are today.
I grew up in a very musical household, but was not musical at all myself. And it was a type of music, the kind of musical household I grew up in was a type of music that I actually don't have that much grow from myself. It was very much musical theatre, which Limerick is quite big for that. My sister ended up on the West End. She was in Les Miserables and a couple of other the big West End shows. So that was the background noise, the background music to my life growing up. And my mother ran a stage school as well, and she used to make a lot of costumes and things like that. But I was quite averse to all of that. It was not really something that I was interested in. But, around that time, 1996, I started to get interested in Irish culture more, do a deeper dive into our own culture and Irish traditional music. So I started off learning on the bodhrán, as a lot of people might. And after that, I sort of progressed onto the bouzouki and started to learn traditional music. I suppose my interest in music has follows on in parallel with a lot of my other interests. And in 1998, I went to art college in Limerick in Clare Street, and I was studying fine art there. And it didn't last. I didn't last very long in art college. When I was upstairs, I was supposed to be upstairs in the studio drawing and painting. I was downstairs in the library reading. So after a year, I figured I was kind of fooling myself, and I moved to Dublin and I started that degree in folklore and archaeology. But as I moved to Dublin, then my wife, who's a very esteemed traditional singer and musician, Muireann Nic Cowley is her name. She's a sean-nós singer and a flute player. So I was going to a lot of sessions, and I learned the bouzouki, and I was playing traditional music sessions. But also, because of my interest in the past and because of my interest in archaeology, I was always had an ear for what people were playing in the ancient past. I'm very interested in prehistory in particular, and there's a family of instruments from about 3,000 years ago, Bronze Age horns. So they're made from bronze, and they're these kind of trumpets or horns that are played, and they sound quite like a didgeridoo. So over the years, I used some of the skills that I developed in art college to make replicas of these musical instruments. And as well as what I would say, the only real instrument I claim to play with any kind of skill would be the bouzouki. But I have an interest in these prehistoric instruments as well. And I've spent a long time, for the last 25 years, making replicas of ancient instruments and learning how to make them and learning how to play them. And in parallel with that as well, because of some of my other sort of creative endeavors, I've been inventing instruments, making some are very precise copies of historical ones, and some are very loose, and some are just fantastical. So I have a whole range of instruments, none of which I'm very good at. I can play the bouzouki okay-ish, but I do like the process of making in all of its forms. So making musical instruments seemed like a great way to feed that kind of hunger that I had to learn more about the past and to learn more about music and all of that kind of thing. So it's been an unusual journey, I suppose, and I'm not a purist about any element of it. But now I have two daughters as well, and they're quite musical. My daughter, she's just about to turn 14, and we were at a session last Sunday, playing traditional music in a session there. So it's wonderful to see it passing on and going down to the generations. And that's one of the things I really like about traditional music is you can have, a 13-year-old playing with somebody who's in their 70s and everybody in between. And sessions have that lovely kind of informal feel to them where the tradition gets passed on from generation to generation as well. But all the way alongside that, I've interest in historical music too.
Yeah, and so I guess look, I mean, I guess the kind of the reason I started the music piece was, and I'm curious to know what the Yé Bahar is, and one of the big questions I wanted to ask for tonight. But as a tutor in the Bouzouki and the Yé Bahar, right, and such a passion for Grawl, for music, and where does music fit in, to the other parts of the jigsaw, right? The archaeology, the folklore, and the assessing of, like, even looking at pagan, the rituals. So,
Yeah.
with such a deep understanding of music, right, or always wanting to discover it,
Yeah.
how does that slide into then the other layers, right? The archaeology, the folklore, and because like naturally, we're all keen to kind of get a bit more on that. See, so where do they meet?
Well, they're all part of this big swirling kind of investigation that I'm doing into life. And one of the ways in which I try to learn more about what it is to be in this world is to look at the past. Because for me, the past gives you alternative perspectives on the world as it is. Obviously it makes a whole lot of sense to figure out how did we get here now? Where did we come from? What are these bigger questions? Um, and for me, looking at the past not only explains the present to a certain extent, but it shows that you can view the world through different prisms and through different lenses. And, you know, I suppose cosmologies of the past, how people interpreted themselves in the world is a really important thing for me to try and understand. Because again, it also gives me it gives me the impression now that, we're a hugely multicultural world and how people can have these different perspectives and these different ontologies about the world, I suppose. So that really is where my interest in things like archaeology and folklore are coming from. But music is a natural outcrop or expression of these kinds of things. Human culture manifests so much through music. And one of the things, it's part of the reason why I got into celebrancy, is that I've always been interested in ritual and ceremony. It's what I have studied academically for so long. Um, and music is really a central part of human celebration, of human culture. We include music in all of the key moments in life. Weddings obviously include music. Music is incredibly powerful in funerals, these really peak moments. And music has this really uncanny ability to invoke emotion. You can say things in words, but when you sing them as part of a song, they increase in potency. They become more profound and more evocative. And therefore, anything I'm trying to achieve in terms of understanding, and then once I gain an understanding of things, to try and express it back artistically into the world, music is central to that. It has to be, as far as I can see. And that's why we include music in everything. We include it in all of our major rituals and ceremonies and celebrations. It's how we console ourselves in grief. It's how we celebrate sporting events. It's how we inaugurate our presidents. It's all there, and music is a central element to that. It's about
Would you
distilling
say
the
it's would you
emotions
say it's
into these moments.
integral to that formulation of celebrancy, that music forms the backbone and the background to
Yeah.
putting things like that together. Because I mean, I've we can all sit here and remember probably a music piece from perhaps a wedding or an event more so than the event itself. Why is that?
Well, I do think it's music makes you feel. It takes a shortcut straight into your feelings. Like, you can sit and hear words that people are saying, and words can be obviously incredibly profound and moving, but there's almost an emotional shortcut that music takes straight into the heart of the person. And it's in its ability to evoke within us. You know, Philip King, who lives around here, he's always quoting Frank Hart. He says, if you want to know, these major points in history, Frank Hart was a wonderful singer and song collector from Dublin. And Frank Hart said, if you want to know what it was like, ask the historians. And if you want to know what it felt like, ask the singers. So
It's funny
that,
because like just I went to Cloughstone. I mentioned that to you last week when we were chatting. So tá gael agam, tá níos mó Spanish agus Garmánis in ish. But in that school and in that environment, music was like everything, right? Along with just brilliant teachers and field sports too. But my biggest memory, as a young first year, right, brand new out of the into the bigger pants was the prayer type of gathering we'd have before the start of the day. And there'd be a bunch of sixth-year fellas kind of looking like something out of the black and white Gaeltacht times. But that five, six bunch of fellas were the band Keela.
yeah,
And they were so passionate about their music that they kind of took on the songs, like the hymns that were being sung in their own way, almost Shannon style,
yeah,
and the rest of us would sort of like kind of hide behind each other as they took over. And there's a band who have trailblazed right across Irish music and instruments, right? So it was telling for me, to kind of remember that. And obviously there was other brilliant musicians like Danan and Hot
mm,
House Flowers out of Cloughstone. So and then many fabulous Uilleann pipers. One particular my own class, Sean Manners. So Blackie Manners, if you will. So I can see where that comes from, right? That music forms a big part of our own traditions, and maybe you might touch on then from the Irish perspective on the tradition of music around rituals, right? So why I think maybe from an Irish perspective, music and traditional music and other forms of it is so embedded in what we're about.
well, I think when any traditional culture, when you look at it, it's almost evolved in perfect sympathy with the culture that creates it. That's it by definition, that's what it is. And that traditional music in the milieu of Ireland and traditional Ireland, such as it was and such as it is to an extent nowadays, it suited us perfectly. It's some elements of traditional music, the keening, for example, this notion of keening over the dead, was an unbelievably profound form of music and poetry and artistic expression. And in a way, I try not to be too sentimental about the things from the past that are lost because culture is always evolving. But I do find that the keening as a custom and as a cultural institution is something that I think we have missed a trick by allowing that to die out. Because basically, what keening was, it was this formalized ritual lament that was done mostly by women over the body of the dead. And it was this really powerful interface between emotion, culture, and all of that at this really high point in life. And what it did was these women they sort of created these extempore songs. They had stock phrases that they would draw from and that they would sing, and they encouraged the people in attendance to sing with them. And the chorus of it had this sort of repeating phrase, this oh ho ho no, oh ho ho no, and it has a very mournful crying sound. And essentially what they did was they brought the community with them in this massive structured outpouring of grief. And it gave stoic men in particular who would never have been free to allow their emotions to hang out there in the wind. You had a cultural institution that gave men permission to cry publicly. And it was a way of the community showing grief. And, for that, you can see it. I just chose it as a particular example because it was a very healthy way of expressing grief. It was structured. It had its own kind of internal sense of rules and that kind of thing. And in a way, I'm sorry that we have lost that ability to communally grieve in this very emotionally cathartic way. But what's curious to me, and perhaps it's just about time, is that Keening, there's some recordings of it from the 1950s and 60s. There is one surreptitious recording that was taken in the 1980s at a funeral, and that is very rarely published because it was taken surreptitiously without permission. And as far as I know, that was the last example in the wild of Keening. But a young singer from Fermanagh called Roish, R-O-Fada-I-S, and I would highly recommend checking out her work. She's just after bringing out an EP where she draws heavily on the Keening tradition. And I would have thought on paper this was perhaps not a good idea. I'd be wary of people who are trying to tackle this thing because it's so big and so powerful. It needs to be done right. But she is a traditional fiddle player and singer from rural Fermanagh, and she really understands the music. So she sort of grew up living this very traditional cultural perspective, and she tackled keening, but has done it in a really interesting way. There's loads of electronic production. It's a very modern digital kind of sounding record, and it's beautiful and it's powerful. And what she has done, which is something that I try to do in my own work as well, is take the deeply traditional, understand where it's coming from, but make it suitable for the 21st century. Because tradition belongs in the past if it's not living and if it's not changing. And if you're expressing tradition in a way that is not vibrant and alive and attending to your audience where they are in the 21st century, audience is perhaps the wrong word, but listeners, um, then you're just performing museum stuff that belongs behind a glass to be perused as elements of uh, ancient culture. But in fact, when you can draw deep from the well of tradition and update it and bring it into the 21st century, then you are living your culture in a way that is dynamic and true and vibrant and relevant.
But what's your feeling about Irish music and traditional music and the connection to folklore of the Ireland of today? I mean, you mentioned obviously, you're wonderful and we're in the Evelyn and you got then people like Mairead and Yvonne on and get Jerry O'Byrne and Eamon Dorley and Donald Clancy and Ross Martin. So um I kind of get a feeling that we're lucky in the sense that music and Irish music and traditional,
Yeah, yeah,
music
exactly.
has allowed us to hold on to the past because I think having lived in Spain and in Germany and been to many parts of the world, I've also seen music in like Asturias in North Spain, or in deep Germany, in where music has allowed people to hang on to the past, but also let it evolve, see it find new voices. So,
Yeah,
um,
very much. And like,
what's the state of play in your opinion with um Ireland of today and maintaining our sense
well,
of the richness of our music and
I think
folklore?
it's in a good place, certainly in the last 5 or 10 years. Things like, there's a lot of different reasons, or a lot of different reasons, I suppose, why being Irish we have a new sense of self-confidence. I think coming through Brexit in a way, for all of its disaster, coming through Brexit in a way was kind of a catalyst for a self-confidence in Irish identity. And, you know, there's an interesting kind of assertiveness that we have in our own culture. Some people misuse it, but that's actually not that common within Irish speaking and traditional music circles. Ireland is increasingly multicultural, and I think I certainly see it in younger people, are confident in their own identity almost as a reaction to globalism, um, but not defining themselves in a negative sense. So they see these other cultures coming to Ireland. We've had immigration for the last 20 years in meaningful numbers. And you see people, rather than just being sort of vaguely in the Anglosphere, people are saying, okay, well, all these cultures speaking their own language, where are we? Well, we have our own language here. And all these people are, bilingual and multilingual. Maybe we should be that as well. And you know, I find Irish language circles very, very tolerant, in fact, of immigrants, and foreign culture in Ireland, because it makes them think about themselves. And also, like in the Gaeltacht, in a lot of ways, and when you engage in traditional Irish music and when you embrace Gaelic culture, you are aware that it is in opposition to um, the dominant Anglosphere kind of culture, the homogenized English speaking world. So you kind of have to not fight, but you have to work on your identity and maintain your identity and do the deep dive. And it allows you to sympathize then with people who can't afford to take their identity for granted and who have to wear their identity or their ethnicity or their linguistic background on their sleeve. So my experience of the Irish language is, it's not backward looking at all.
Tolerance.
It's
Yeah.
quite cosmopolitan. And people who play traditional music generally tend to be pretty on the ball. Um, Obviously, I'm painting with broad brushes, but this is my experience of it. It's about not taking it for granted, and it's about recognizing in others that they have their identity and they have to work to maintain their identity, or they have to defend their identity in some ways. And sometimes you find that as well, that you do have to defend your identity a little bit, even within Ireland, especially
Sure.
sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point about having Irish, I mean, when I went abroad and being able to simply say and talk well dog and
Yeah,
actually talk Tommy Airnock and being able to speak it and then have the ability to take an interest in where I was in Asturias or in the
yeah,
Basque Country,
yeah,
and that you can open your mind to that. So certainly having a little sense of your identity
yeah.
allows you to
I
look
mean,
at others, right?
it makes you think of colonization as well and colonialism. And I don't want to get into the big victim thing either, because plenty of Irish people participated in colonialism on both sides of it as the perpetrators and the receivers of it. But it does make you think at least about it. And hopefully it makes you think about the dynamics at play and the powers at play, and not to take things for granted, not to take your culture, your language, your music, your identity, your place in the world for granted. It gives you pause. And when you are part of the majority, no matter where you are, if you're not thinking about, if your default is your culture, you don't think that other people have their own language, you don't think that other people might be creating their identity under pressure. And, I think Irish people, um, can think about these things and perhaps be sympathetic and,
And
perhaps.
if I press you on the Ireland of today, 100 years since the
Yeah,
formation of the state, like with your interest in archaeology and Ireland, I mean, I'm sure it's kind of there's a global perspective to this, but um, you know, when was Ireland at its greatest from your work? And this is a throwaway question before, Anglicization and all that came with that, but you know. Is your work been able to say that there was an Ireland at a time of pure everybody spoke Gaeilge,
I
between
mean,
like when was there a real period like that that just died and
no, like
granted Gaeltachts have kept it alive, but where did it shift?
yeah, okay, well, like there is, my whole thing is that our identity historically has never, ever, ever been fixed. And there is no golden age of Ireland. There are golden ages of certain aspects of Ireland. So if you say Gaelic culture, when was Gaelic culture at its highest flourishing. You could look
Right.
back to just before the Viking invasions and you could say, well, that was Gaelic culture in Ireland at that time. And then the Vikings came in and they brought their influence to bear and they had immigration in from Scandinavia. Then the Normans came in and then you have the whole back and forth with England. Then you have all these other groups, the Palatines, um,
Moroccans in Baltimore.
yeah, I mean, like, but the point, I suppose, is that it has never been static. And you can say Gaelic culture, I suppose, the death knell of Gaelic culture started to happen after the Battle of Kinsale with the flight of the Earls. But like, what did we lose there? You say, okay, we lost the language and we lost some of the the old institutions of Ireland. We lost the native poetic tradition, which was 1,000 years old or more. We lost the harping tradition when it started to go. We lost the Brehon law tradition. All of these things started to decline. But like, you know, I would not like to live in Gaelic Ireland because it was a really hierarchical society. It was a misogynistic society. It was deeply unequal in so many ways. There is no golden age. There's golden ages for particular elements of culture, sure. You could say Ireland was very influential in the early medieval period when we were spreading Christianity all across Europe. We brought Christianity in the 430s, and then we started exporting it after a couple of hundred years. So you could say if Christianity is your thing, you could say, well, then Ireland in the seventh, eighth, ninth century was a fabulous center for art and learning and creativity. But if you're not Christian or if that's not something that's of interest to you, then there's no golden age of that. So, it kind of reminds me not to get too sidetracked, but this slogan that the current American administration have of made America great again. It's like, when was it ever great? It was great and it was terrible, just depending on who you talk about and what your perspective is. And Ireland is like that. It's just like, Gaelic Ireland, we lost a lot, but we're in a very healthy place as a country who suffered a lot of colonialism. We're in a very healthy place. We're mostly self-determining. Our children go to school, they get good education, we have very good health outcomes. Honestly, looking at things through the historical lens gives me a huge appreciation for how far we've come, and how well we're doing in the world. Obviously, we have so much more to do, but in a lot of ways, when you take the historical look at it, you say there's no point where we had it sorted. There's no point where we had it fixed. There was no golden age. There was loads of golden ages and loads of dark ages. And that's the history of any culture and any country and any people because they're dynamic things. There's no one year, there's no 1 hour that you can say this is Ireland. Ireland is in a state of flux, always has been, always will be, because that's the nature of the world.
What's the best part of Ireland? Is it where you are in Dingle, or where's your favorite place to be?
Very controversial. I have to say, I'm very happy where I am. Um, I really love where I live. Other places I love. I love going to the Burren. I find the Burren an utterly profound place to be. Um, I find Limerick City, because I grew up there and I have a lot of connection to Limerick City. That's a very dynamic place to me. I
I
lived
did
in,
a master's. I did a master's in Limerick, so
yeah, I lived in Dublin for
many
years.
a time, many a night in Dolan's, listening to
Yeah,
great musicians.
yeah. I mean, it's wonderful. Like Dolan's, you can go into Dolan's and it can be five separate gigs happening at the same time. It's an incredible place. Um, but I find the Burren second to here. I mean, here I'm looking at my window now and I can see Mount Brandon above. I can see a 12th century Romanesque church. There's a 6th century monastery below that, and there's a Bronze Age standing stones in my front garden. Like, I'm looking through time, through historical time and geologic time, and it's all there in front of me.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, that's an incredible, like, I'm incredibly fortunate to live where I do.
I
But
actually read a great book recently, Richie Fitzgerald, fabulous big wave surfer,
oh yeah,
and just reading through Richie's book, and I went through a period of trying a bit of surfing, and what resonated was when you get to sit on a wave, or the set of beginnings of waves, looking all around you, at the coastlines of Sligo and Donegal and Mayo and even Clare, it's just like we are blessed with, what's on our doorsteps, if you will, you know.
Yeah, and I think one of the things perhaps we have taken for granted through no fault of our own is that we have lived through, at least in this corner of the island, that should be, I should preface that, we've lived through an era of peace and prosperity, which is almost an aberration in terms of European history. So I had the good fortune of living in a world that, we was doing pretty well. And history teaches us that things can turn pretty quickly. So we should be very grateful for, the fact that we live safely for the moment. But yeah,
The
we
group, your group, Umha Aois,
yeah.
fascinated to maybe know about that in terms of what it speaks to.
So Uish is a group. I've been a member of the group since about 2003. They're a group of artists, archaeologists, engineers, craftspeople, jewelers, ceramic artists, and we get together once a year and we investigate the metalworking and the bronze casting traditions from prehistory, from the Bronze Age mostly. So what we do is we get together for a week, we make these furnaces in the ground, we fill them with charcoal, and we melt bronze and we pour them into molds and we make replicas of historical objects, axe heads or bracelets, or like I said, some of them are musical instruments as well. So it's a way of investigating Bronze Age technology and methods and techniques. But because there's so many artists in the group as well, and anthropologists and archaeologists and all kinds of people, it's an incredibly fertile place for sharing ideas. And it just becomes this really rich and rewarding experience. And it's taught me a lot about our ancestors and their approach to technology and innovation. Um, and it's a really beautiful way to get practical, hands-on experience of like bronze casting. When you do it at night in particular, it's a really profound and beautiful thing to see. The bronze, it looks like lava. So it glows internally because it's 1300 degrees Celsius. And then when you pour it, it moves like mercury. So if you imagine lava that flows like mercury, that's what molten bronze is like. And you have this very short window of where you take the crucible out of the fire and pour it into the mold, and lots of things can go wrong. So it's quite a tense moment when you do this pour. You perhaps spend a couple of weeks making molds, and if there's a small crack in it, the whole thing is goosed. So um, it's an amazing
Where would you do that? Where would you meet
all
for
over.
that?
We did it in all different places. We're doing it this year. I actually can't attend this year because I'm part of another project called Sounds from a Safe Harbour in Cork. But this year they're doing it in Drummond, I think it is, in South Kerry, and they're investigating solar symbolism in the Bronze Age, which is something I've studied a lot, in fact, and I'm donating a lot of the things that I've made through my investigation of solar symbolism in prehistory to them for an exhibition that they're doing. But that will be in September of this year. And like I said, unfortunately, I can't go because I'm doing another project in September. But if people are interested,
I must look that up. Absolutely. We'd love to share that with the group.
yeah,
Um,
links
we-
like a lot, some of the stuff at least that I'm talking about, you'll find links to it on my website, which is tradition.ie, and that has sort of springboards or links into the various different things that I do. So if you go to
uh, I'd,
tradition.ie, you can chase
I'd
it down.
love to sit here and talk about raves, but
Yeah,
pagan, I mean, raves, from all the years, but pagan rave, what's
yeah.
that?
Yeah, like as a friend of mine said recently, a friend of mine who's been, helping me out with this since the start, he says it's quite badly named because they're not really pagans and it's not really a rave. But it's I suppose paganism,
Sunrise, probably sunrise, is it kind of more,
it's the apotheosis of all the different strands of my interests and research. So essentially what we do is we have these ceremonies or events essentially where we dress up in costume Some of them are based on historical or, versions from folklore or archaeology. A lot of them are stuff that I'm making up myself, but they're made of bone and animal skin.
They
Ethically.
look like I looked at the website. They look absolutely brilliant. I
Yeah.
mean, it looks so much fun.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, that's very much part of it. So, we play musical instruments, we perform on stage, and then it sort of segues into a DJ set. We're singing songs, playing drums, all that kind of stuff. But it segues into a DJ set and then a sort of 2 hours of dance tunes and, strobe lights and lasers and things like that. Um, so it's
I know Neve was on. Maybe the next HEI AGM could be amalgamated into something like that. Neve is around. I'm taking votes on that. That sounds like it could be a.
it's
We've been
good.
given
It
we've been
really is.
given out about the virtual format of our AGM. So maybe this could be one way to certainly shake the cobwebs of a few people.
It's the absolute opposite of virtual. It's visceral, And like we do this thing where the audience are sort of there's a rope that holds the audience back while we light the fires and do the performances and stuff. And then at a particular moment where the music is very intense, we cut the ropes and the audience spills in, and suddenly all of the creatures and all of the participants are all in the one space together.
I'll just put it up in the chat so people might even see it, as we're chatting away. But
Yeah.
certainly worth a look. Like we were talking about, your views on, celebrancy and the format and the customs that are there. And we might kind of just look at that. So you're sort of fairly strong views about how it is viewed today and maybe the direction it can go in because we talk about whether it's from birthing to weddings to funerals to the naming, but in general, like the the whole concept of celebrancy,
Yeah.
um where is it at?
Like I can only speak from my own perspective, I suppose. Um, but humans and all over the world, when I was studying folklore and archaeology, we these themes kept coming up over and over, and it was Arnold van Gennep, who was an anthropologist in the 20th century. He came up with the phrase for the first time, rites of passage, and he speaks about separation, transformation, and reintegration. And essentially, what it is, it's about creating a ritual space at important times in the human life. And you undergo ceremony when you are in ritual space and you emerge back into society transformed by these rituals. And it almost seems to be a human universal that cultures all over the world follow these kind of structures or practices. Um, and, births, weddings, coming of age ceremonies, deaths, we're familiar in Ireland with the usual ones. For a lot of people, it would be a Christian like a rite and that kind of thing. But the more I looked at this as a sort of emergent phenomenon in human culture, and the more as somebody from a sort of a non-religious and a humanist perspective, I felt drawn to engage with people in that space and to make meaningful ceremonies for those who don't want to do it along traditional or religious lines. And it really it was because of my interest and my essentially my view that human ritual and celebration it's it's something that is central to what it means to be human. And I think, like, not to hark back to it too much, but that became all the more acute during COVID when we were cut off from our rituals of just being with each other. When people died during COVID and we couldn't go to their funeral, there was something profoundly wrong. The cosmic order felt upturned by that. And it just brought even more sharply into focus that a huge part of your identity as a son, as a father, as a friend, as a brother, as a husband, your identity in all of these different spheres gets iterated and reiterated in part through ceremony and through gathering and through celebration and through ritual and through marking the important times in life. And that to me, it's a powerful motivation for me to be able to engage with that. I was coming up with with ceremonies long before I considered becoming a celebrant. Like, I had naming ceremonies for my two daughters. We went to a lake up outside Killarney, and I made a little boat out of reeds, and I put a little soy candle, biodegradable soy candle, into it. And I had my mother, and my wife's father light two separate candles, and they took these flames and put it into the one flame on the boat, and we set the boat off into the lake. And it was just a really simple, symbolic way of marking the beginning of a life's journey. And to me, it was something that I was doing anyway. And I was drawing from my knowledge and my perspective of history and folklore and archaeology, but coming up with something new, something that felt elemental in a way, sort of bypass the complexities of culture and just get to something that was small, something that was primal, and that was, of the nature around us. It was just made of reeds from near the lake. And in a way, in its smallness and in its simplicity, to me, it felt utterly profound. So I gradually got more and more into the idea of attending to both myself and other people's need for ceremony. And that's why I became a celebrant. But like I said, it's because of, I suppose, I'm in a funny place being a lecturer as well. Like, I'm with the theology department of the university, but I'm a non-religious person, and I study religion. I study religion morning, noon, and night. I talk about it. I lecture about it. I wrote my doctoral thesis on the cult of a saint. And yet, if you find yourself thinking about these things in a non-religious perspective, and you see how meaningful they are for religious people, you say, well, non-religious people need the opportunity to create that meaning for themselves. And that's the motivation. That's why I became a celebrant, was to facilitate people in their need for that.
Amazing. And we could chat all night. I mean, it was like we were like best mates last week over a pint, but even though we were just on the mobile, but I'm conscious of all of our wonderful people on. I'd like to open it up to our audience. If anybody who's been listening and observing wants to raise their hand, the virtual Zoom hand, and we will endeavor to get you to say hello and ask your question. Do I have a first hand, please? Steve, yeah, I see your hand up there. We'll ask you to unmute. I think we can do that. I think you might be able to. Yeah, please, Steve. Floor is yours.
Hiya, Billy. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thanks, Steve.
I have a strange sort of question for you, really.
Sure.
I was educated by the Christian Brothers in Dublin, and I was educated in Irish, but I could never. It was just so badly taught. Like, I think at the end, like when I was eventually left and did my leaving cert, and I remember doing the oral exams, and I thought I still have bad dreams about it, about how unprepared I was for it, and how awful the whole thing was. And I had absolutely no love or graw for the language at all. But as I've got older, I see the importance of it, because I see signs and I see symbols and I see the significance of a language. But what I'm what I'm asking about here really is that it seems to me that there's been a terrible separation of us as a culture, by virtue of the fact that we were made lose our language, and we had to learn another language, and we had to try and reinvent ourselves. And in some ways, through the Gaelic and cultural revival, that we found our identity through our music. And I look at people like Peter Gabriel today, who enhances the tradition of world music, and how important it is to us. So I suppose I don't so much have a question for you as so much as saying, you know, that separation of identity between the brokenness of our language and our culture, and
Yeah.
we try to reinvent it.
Like it's complex, and I don't propose to have any answers. And in a way, the education of Irish people in the language is something that I have as a conversation, I have largely withdrawn from because I don't have any answers. I did hear an interesting comment on that very topic, though, Steve, where, you know, a guy, I can't remember who it was saying that, you know, the Christian Brothers kept banging on about how English was the language of the oppressor, and yet, for my educational experience, Irish was the language of my oppressors. So, you know, I'm very much sympathetic to that perspective. Um, but all I can think of, you know, I'm really only in command of my own little patch here, my own little room or my own workshop outside, or teaching Irish to my children. But, you know, for me, it's a lot easier that I live in the Gaeltacht. It's something you do have to work at, no matter what it is. Even the native speakers here have to work to keep the tide of English back. And it's not about being anti-English at all, because you don't need to teach your children English in the Gaeltacht. They will learn it. It's there, and my children are wonderfully fluent in English. Their English is just as good as their Irish. But uh, for me, I suppose the only way I can contribute is by having Irish central to what I do. I do that personally because it's important to me, but also, like, when you come to one of our big celebrations, the Pagan Rave festivals, or one of my wife's gigs or whatever, like, Irish is as much the language of it as English, but it's celebration, it's joyful, it's sometimes it's disruptive and bold sometimes, you know, we're playful with it, but at the end of the day, there's nothing about Irish in particular that's better or worse than any other language. It just happens to be our one. And to include it in the things that we do, and to make space for it in the things that we do, because the things that we do, to us at least, are fun and are culturally significant to us, then Irish finds a place to be fun and to be engaging and to be culturally significant. And that's all I can really do,
Yeah,
is
and
to.
Billy, I mean, like, just for Steve, I mean, I was teaching kids on the weekend, and I know one of the children speaks Irish because I know his parents speak Irish. And in the class, I was able to speak Irish to that young 8-year-old, and his eyes lit up that his múntóir, his snáv múntóir, bhí sé ná Gaeilge leabhart, as in I could teach him in Irish, right? So, like, it's
Yeah,
little tiny things about Irish that, it doesn't have to be so, public, but, to your kind of general statement, it is, a state, like, issue, like, that the state itself, in my opinion, and the education system. I was fortunate to go to an all Irish school in
yeah.
Slorgan, and one of few. I mean, and so, you look at people in Wales, and the love for Welsh. I think there's many ways to fix it, but to have people like Billy maybe at the table, and to
Well,
drive it
again,
on in a
I don't.
simple term.
Yeah, but I don't feel like I have any answers, you know. All I can do is do what I do and hope that people like what I do and come with me when I do it.
You're
And
doing it here.
that's all I can do, you know. Pass it on to my children and throw open big public events. And if people want to come and enjoy it and find that there's Gaeilge at the heart of this thing, then all the better. Weddings as well, you know, I do weddings, and occasionally I involve it in funeral celebrations as well. That Irish will be an important part of that. And normally, because I'm based out in West Kerry, I don't move much further than Limerick, Cork, Kerry. There's enough here to keep me busy, but I will go quite far to do ceremonies in Irish. I'll go to Dublin, I'll go to Galway, I've gone to, in fact, I was in Dublin in March for a bilingual ceremony, just because I feel it's something I can do, and therefore I'll do
Steve, we might look at Irish for all of our celebrants too.
it.
Might get some
I'm
classes.
happy to help. Like, sometimes some of the other celebrants or people would come to me for translations, or do I have readings and things like that. And I'm always more than willing to share, because, you know, the more we can do, the better. And I don't think lesser of anybody who doesn't have a graph of it or doesn't have a command of it, or, you know, and I understand the complexity and the historical baggage of it in every direction. my way of reacting to that is just by doing what I'm doing and hope that some people at least think that it's okay.
Is Irish in your family, Billy? Like, or was it were
Not
everyone?
really, not really, a little bit, not really, but it is now, it really is now.
Oh,
And my brothers and sisters, my mom have come with me, in a lot of ways, because I spoke to my children in Irish. So they gradually improved their Irish just to be able to communicate with the children as well. And it's
my
worked really well.
my parents came from the Falls Road, so they know Irish. But
Yeah,
ironically, there's more Irish spoken there now than probably many other places for lots of
probably,
reasons.
probably.
So thank you for that, Steve. Have we another hand up? I can see if you can click the virtual Zoom hand, great. If not, want to raise your hand, I think we can spot you. Um, Anybody there that can click the Zoom hand? Thanks, Steve. Anybody else want to say hi or question?
Uh, let's see. Yeah, Roisin has said Irish is only recently recognised in the courts in the north. Like, I have a lot of friends from Belfast. I'm friends with the lads from Kneecap as well, so I'd be fairly, not totally clued in, but reasonably clued into what's going on up there. And again, like the North is interesting. I think people from the North who are culturally engaged and people who are in the Gaeltacht have a similar perspective in that in the North, no matter where you're coming from, you don't take your identity for granted. It's not the default. You're thinking about your identity in some ways, you define your identity occasionally by what you're not. You're an Irish speaker, not an English speaker, or whatever it is. But there is a kind of a sympathy for people in the north when you live in the Gaeltacht that it's not just the default and not everybody is the same. And you do have to kind of, if you wish to have an identity, you need to maintain it. And for me, I think that's an interesting thing. And Irish speakers in the north in particular, they face pushback all the time. Not the same pushback you get here in this part of the world. It's a different kind of pushback you get here, but there's a kind of an institutional pushback occasionally in the north. And then there's a kind of a cynical politicization of the north sometimes, of Irish in the north, which thankfully people like Linda Irvine are bypassing and are, demonstrating that Irish is a language, it's not a political position, and that people can engage with it in lots of different ways. So I'm very glad of that there is that perspective there, and that it is a historical thing and a cultural thing, and it's one part of the many, many different cultural strands and expressions on this island. So yeah, there you go.
That said, Roisin McFadden. Roisin, you're welcome to say it if you like about, or just some comments. I see you there. You're welcome to unmute and say hello about your question on Druids if you like, or anything else you want to ask. Nope, happy to.
So,
Oh, there you are. Oh, there you are. Go ahead.
no, it's just like I joined this because I have such a fascination, I suppose, with our folklore and our culture. It's something that I'm only recently starting to explore. I suppose with the Irish language, like all my cousins are fluent in it. Most of them are teachers in the Gaelic schools up here. And I suppose I would like to sort of get more involved in that. But aside, I suppose with the Druids, I suppose I have a fascination with that, and there's not an awful lot documented on it. I was wondering, Billy, had you any more insight on that?
I mean, the biggest problem is that there isn't enough documented on it. There's some good enough books at it. There's essentially two different types of sources on the Druids. There's the contemporary sources, who would be from Greek and Roman perspectives. They're problematic in the sense that they're not from the Druids' own cultures. They are people who were interested or hostile towards the Druids. So it's a bit like trying to find out what the culture of Afghanistan is like by asking Americans. You know what I mean? You might get glimpses of authentic expressions of that culture, but in a way, it's going to be passed through a lens, and that lens is going to be a distorting lens. So, in a way, that to me is probably the most useful place to start in thinking about Druids if you want to know what the Druids of ancient France were like. Um, were they the same as Druids in ancient Ireland? It's very difficult to say. The other set of sources you get on Druids then comes from the historical period in Ireland. So you're talking the same place. This is a place where Druids were, and it's the same ethnic group. It's the Gaelic people for whom Druids were their priests in the prehistoric period. But all of these sources are hundreds of years after the Druids had ceased to be an institutional group in Ireland. So essentially, asking Christians what Druids were like is going to be very, very fraught. And that's an even more distorting lens in a way. They do give us glimpses of what Druids might have been. Can you reconcile that with sources for Druids from France 700 years earlier? Was Druidry the same thing 700 years later and 1500 kilometers away? So it's a complex thing, but and then, you know, there's a couple of different ways in which the Druids are portrayed in Irish culture. Sometimes they're portrayed, you know, as the opponents of Saint Patrick. And when they are, they're very much painted along the lines of the Magi from the Bible, for example, or sorcerers from Babylonia and that kind of thing. So whether there's any true element of what Druids were like in those sources, or were they too heavily influenced by the Bible, it's hard to say. Then other sources that you get in Ireland would be the saga material. So cycles of the Kings of Tara, or the Ulster cycle or the Fenian cycle. They might talk about Druids. Those have their own perspectives and their own agendas. You know, so you get this broad, to paint in very broad strokes, they were the holy men and sometimes women of the prehistoric religion of Ireland, Britain, and France. Seems that they were in charge of teaching about the gods, teaching about cosmology, conducting sacrifices, making prophecies. These are all things that seem to be common to both traditions, at least. But the fine details about Druids are all problematic. It's very hard to nail down what they are. There's a couple of good books on the Druids. Miranda Green, I think, has written a good enough book. I think Caesar's Druids, she calls it, and that focuses on the Gaulish Druids. There's another quite interesting book as well called Ireland's Immortals, and that traces the development or the arc of how the gods and goddesses of pre-Christian Ireland were portrayed during the Christian period. It's by a guy called Mark Williams. And although I don't agree with everything in the book, he certainly traces the evolution of how gods and goddesses were portrayed in Irish tradition in the early medieval period. And it makes for very interesting reading. But what he also talks about there, and there's another scholar again called Ronald Hutton who has spoken about this at length. He talks about Druids in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, and how we thought about Druids and how we portrayed Druids in more recent centuries, and how that may have distorted our image of what Druids are as well. So it's a very, very complex topic with a lot of different angles and a lot of different sources. It's hard to nail it down, but there are some general things that we can say with reasonable confidence about the Druids, whoever they were. We have another message here. Oh, Gail is gone. Thanks, Gail. Yeah,
If you're there, please, Eric.
I'd be happy to take another question.
Thank you, Billy. Really, really very interesting. And hello to you all. Billy, given the impact of music, as you say, emotional times of our life, and helping us maybe with grief and so on, I wonder, from your knowledge and your interest and your creativity, have you thought about what music you'd like played at your funeral?
That's a very good question. I haven't. And I suppose the only reason why I haven't is because I'm slightly busy thinking about other people's funerals. But I suppose I would like, if I had to choose, I've never been asked and I've never thought about it, but now that you have me on the spot, I would like Port na Buccaí, I think. Port na Buccaí, I don't know if you know it, but it's a song from the Blasket Islands. And it's something that I have recorded with my wife. It's on my website, you can find it there. But to me, the story of that piece of music is really beautiful. It was one of the O'Dowlig family. He was a fisherman and he was out on the sea one night and he heard this music coming from somewhere, and he attributed it to the supernatural. Like when you're out 4 kilometers off the coast and you suddenly start to hear music in 1920, that's as good an explanation as any, I suppose. So he went home and he started playing this tune, and he claimed it was a supernatural tune. And the tune has a very interesting, some interesting phrases in it, which, to me anyway, it gives it a kind of a haunting sound. Some people have suggested that it was because he was in the Naivoga type of currach, they have the canvas on the water, that he may have heard whales, and that the whales might have been making their music through the water, and then the skin of the boat would have sort of resonated with the whale song. So he could have heard whales from underneath and mistaken it for supernatural music. Or maybe he made it into a story about the supernatural. But in any case, it's a very beautiful piece of music, and words got attached to it at a later stage, again by one of the O'Dalik family, and it talks about a woman who has gone to the supernatural world, and she's wishing her family a goodbye. She's saying goodbye to them one last time, and she says, "When the cock crows, I will go with them." It's in Irish, obviously. When the cock crows, I'll go with them, and I have to stay in the supernatural world as long as there is water in the waves. But to me, it's a very haunting piece of music, and it has this beautiful story behind it, and it's very evocative. So if I had to choose a piece of music, that would be it.
I asked Billy, as I think it's a good question to provoke a thought of our own arrangements, or to place us in that thought of how or what do we want others to hear? How do we want our death celebrated? And as you say, music is where we can all meet.
Yeah, I had the very good fortune, I think, um, of being with a friend of mine last August. Owen French is his name. He performed under the name Talos, and he was a good friend of mine, a close friend, a very, very beautiful singer and profound singer-songwriter. But he was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. So there was about 4 of us who sat with him in the hospice in Maryborough for about 10 days while he left this world. And we had a lot of time to think about the funeral. And because he was a musician, everyone he knew was a creative person and a musician. And the music that we played and sang and performed, and I conducted his funeral ceremony. But that was one of the most profound experiences of my life, and music was central to that. To see a person out of the world and then to sing them out of the world was just like, it's incomparable in terms of the gravitas and the weight and the profundity and the beauty of it. So that speaks to the power of it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Billy.
Billy, kind of just with Eric's, thought or piece there, you think of people like Yeats and the Irish literary revival activity, and him looking at mysticism and spiritualism. In your opinion, who is the person that really brought Irish music revival to where you're at your happy place? Just curious.
I think, like, we have to give it to Ariada in a lot of ways about resetting the direction of where the revival is that I feel part of in a way. So Sean Ariada, you know, kicked a whole lot off. He lit a fuse in a lot of ways, and the explosion is still happening. So I would have to credit him if we had to nail it down to one person. But again, it's very difficult, and for fear of being reductive, it's difficult to say that it lies with any one person, because before O'Riordan he didn't invent it, and after O'Riordan people have taken the thing that he started and ran with it in so many different directions, that we can credit him with a huge amount, but he was one of many. And that's something actually that is quite nice about being in tradition, is that there's a kind of a genealogy and you can see it running back in time, you know, but also there is a sort of an anonymity to it, that you don't know who wrote most of the tunes you play when you play in a session. You don't know where the origin is of most of the songs that you sing necessarily. So you feel part of this big, broad, unofficial kind of ecosystem of music that has no hard boundaries. It has no fixed point in time, and you don't know where it's going, but it's in this constant state of flux and evolution. And it feels really good to be part of that.
Um, we've gone over time, and we have a little piece. When we do our talks, we call it the last word. We just ask you to say thank you, and we ask for the last word. Um, I'm listening, and like everybody else, have been enthralled by tonight. Instead of the last word, I'm just going to be bold. Could there be a last music? Could you give us something, or would you like to just verbally? But if there was a tune or something that came to mind, um,
I,
I
you've caught me on the spot now.
yeah,
And I don't have any instruments here with me. But what I would suggest, can I send a link? And when we log
yeah,
off, you can watch this.
we'd love that. Yeah,
Um,
if you want to, if you even want to think of a link and put it on the chat now, people can
yeah, I'll
maybe.
do that. I'll find the exact thing. So this is
Yeah,
my wife Maureen and I playing and singing that exact song that I was just speaking about. Um, because and this I suppose might go a little way to explaining what the yebehar is, the instrument. You can see this instrument that I've built, and that I'm playing there. Um, so I'll send you this. Um, Send you this, and when you log off, just have a look. Let this be my final word.
that'd be brilliant. So you type it in, and we'll
Yeah, there it is. I just throw it in the chat there. There's a Facebook or a YouTube link there, so you can go to that, and let that be my final word.
Thanks so much, Billy.